Good morning. My name is Katherine and this is Hanna and we are Zwei. I'll just flip this on to the next one. This is us. We are German for two, Zwei meaning two in German, and you've got a little pronunciation on the right. So our business started as the two of us, and we are the thought leaders for the business. We have grown in size, but essentially we are Zwei. We've been practicing together for over 8 years, and during that time have developed a strong hospitality portfolio and continue to love designing new spaces for food and coffee outlets. But one of us is German.
That's me.
And that's Hanna. Okay. So what we wanted to do, just briefly, to start off, is almost capture the moment in time. If we were to capture the hospitality scene at the moment, I guess we're quite Melbourne-centric. We're from Melbourne in Australia. This is what we think it is. So while the customer might think that a kitchen looks like this, and this is Noma in Copenhagen, we know the reality is something more like this. And why we all get bombarded in the media about climate change and environmental destruction. We all want to be in spaces that look more like this. It seems that while we're continuing to remove ourselves even further from the natural environment, there is a strong move towards tactile, meaningful, authentic spaces. And while the reality of our food production is probably like this, we would like to imagine that our food has been grown by a local smallholding farmer and looks somewhat more like this. And while generations in the past might have aspired to dine like this, we now dine like this. And this is Chin Chin in Melbourne. It's been instrumental in changing the restaurant scene in the city. The restaurant takes no bookings, it serves authentic, spicy Asian food and talks to the customer directly through social media. It is the go-to food destination in Melbourne of recent years and looks more like this. It's impossible to get a seat. But what is it that makes spaces wonderful to walk into? It's that indefinable something that just makes it work. You cannot identify exactly what it is, but the space is both comfortable and yet exciting, and it has a sense of discovery. What we're going to talk about today are two projects that Zwei have produced. But first of all, I just wanted to break into some theory. It's something that we hold very strongly when we go through the design concept, and there's some very strong themes in our work. While I do this, Hanna is going to distract you by exciting your senses.
I want to give you the sensory experience. We're not trying to do the style here,
no,
but we'll give you some sensory experience.
So architectural theorist Juhani Palasma has stated that buildings have turned into image products, detached from existential depth and sincerity, and expounded a return for architecture to address all the senses simultaneously and to fuse our image of ourselves with our experience of the world. Nowhere is this more important than within interior spaces, the spaces in which we occupy and live our everyday lives. Creating a sensory space, one that fulfills one's body with sensory stimulation, the smell of the coffee, hopefully it's going around the room, the chitter-chatter of people in the cafe, watching people pass by on the street from within. It's a connected space. Henri Lefebvre, a 20th century French philosopher, wrote of sitting in his apartment with the windows open, experiencing the sounds and smells of the market street below, and feeling connected to the street, the community and the city as a whole. A space that is sensory does not have to be designed. Some of the most delightful food spaces are ones that happen on the street or in the back street, the tumbling down spaces. They're not the coolest place in town, but they have an authentic connection to themselves and to our past and our community as a whole. But when we talk about sensory spaces, what is it? And it really is simply one that fulfills all five senses: the touch, the hear, the smell and the taste, and not just our eyes. And sometimes the most engaging spaces are ones that provide an overwhelming sensory stimulation. So it's their noise, it's their light, it's their smell, it's all of those elements coming and playing together. And it's why places like street markets, which are almost completely undesigned, are so forgettable, they're so memorable because it's so confronting, it's so overwhelming, and you're so embedded in the experience. You can't escape, and you're on the verge of being overwhelmed. But also, these senses build something deeper, a deeper connection, and that's the memories that are evoked. They stir something deep within ourselves, and they make us feel a connection. So it might be the tactile timber in a cafe, the crumbling brickwork, or just the hustle and bustle of a cafe, but it's these elements that build to create a space that works. And it's a sense of discovery, a sense of engaging with the space. You move through the space and it unfolds to you. And so you're really interacting with that space. It's not just so many retail spaces you walk in, you see the product and you know what the whole, the program of the space is. But maybe spaces that surprise you, like what we saw with Colin. Amazing spaces, and you can imagine that every area has a separate story to tell you as you move through and progress through that hotel experience. What I'm going to do is hand over to Hanna, and she's going to talk through two projects. So the first one is Code Black, it's a coffee roastery, and the second one is a small cafe. They're both based in Melbourne, and Code Black is reasonably large, but the second one is a tiny little cafe. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I think I'd love to start with our client, actually. So this is Code Black. We've got a very lucky client who has the same passion in his field that what we do. So we've got the passion in creating interiors, but not creating our own castles, but creating for the customer the experience. And the client has the same. He loves his coffee. He wants to have the coffee spilling out of the building. So that's kind of a very lucky thing to have, I think, a great client. This is Code Black. Sorry, this is Code Black. It's a when you approach it, it's almost like a facade which closes itself up, uninviting almost. But yeah, we basically inserted Code Black had the brief to have coffee roasting, administration, dispatch, and a cafe all under one roof. So it's an old warehouse, 2 sections. Which is on the left side is the one, then the middle you can kind of see where it finishes, and then on the other side is the dispatch. At Code Black, we aim to create the space that fully engages with people on all their senses. They could smell the coffee, as we said before, they could see the bean production, they could taste the food from the open kitchen, and they could feel the tactile materials within the customer zone, and then take the coffee which has been created, what's just going around at the moment, which has been put on the retail shelf, to then take home to extend that experience which we hopefully created in that cafe. We programmed the different operations within the space. We inserted an architectural element which you can see outside as well. Sorry, I'll just turn to here. We basically, our new insertion was a very masculine, strong steel element, which we got from outside and drew it into the inside to guide you through the space. So that was our aim. So the facade at the moment is, you see it open as it stands, but it's basically an outdoor seating area, and we had 3 sliding doors which have mostly wide glass, which is obscured glass, and then just in the middle, I'll just point to it, just here, has a very small kind of level of clear glass. So from the outside, once the whole operation is shut, you actually don't see very much. You can get a glimpse through there and the space reveals itself just in the tiniest way. You really have to start interacting with the space by the heaviest, not too heavy, but they're solid steel doors. There's 3 sliding doors, steel glass doors, which then you have to slide open to basically go into that space and interact with that space. Basically, that's what you get presented with when you walk through those doors. So the space basically on both sides has a communal table, and then, sorry, is this okay if I just point to this one? That's basically the start of the counter, It's a 13-metre long counter, which basically is put on, and I'll show you the floor plan in a minute, is been put on an angle, so the eye gets drawn along that counter. The point of sale, which is the first point of interaction to the customer from the operations side, past the coffee machine, and then to the rear, which is in the back. Oops, sorry, technology. There, and I'll show you on this side here too. That's basically in the back. That's the roaster, which to us the concept was almost like use it like a church, like an altar. So you get drawn to that back. Your eye gets drawn into the back, and you see that see the roaster, which is basically the hero of the whole space. So that's where the beans get roasted, the smell gets created, everything starts from there to then to the warehouse side, to the dispatch, and then to the cafe operation, really. Sorry. This is the floor plan. We'll just briefly show. So you enter from the right side, like that's the entry point, the outside, 2 communal tables, and then we basically put the counter slightly on an angle to really draw your eye to the back, to that roaster in the back here. Past the kitchen here, which is a very small operation. They do produce 400 meals a day on a weekend, so it does seem like a very small back of house, but it functions really well. So what they actually produce and get out to the customer is amazing. Besides the coffee, so the coffee gets all produced here on 2 coffee machines, and the pour over. So Melbourne's very much into the making of different ways of coffee. So that all happens on this counter here to the roastery in the back. Then you've got some tasting and cupping, which is basically for the insiders, for people who want to buy the coffee beans. Here's another roaster. So this steel again draws you into the connects the 2 areas, and then here's another roaster with a big storage shelves of the raw beans. Here is the dispatch, and then the office, which then has the pickup here and the delivery. We'll go through the other slides. This is basically the retail shelf in the front of house. So when you come in, instead of looking straight ahead to the counter, that's on the right side, the retail shelf with all of this and what you've just been going through. All the coffee bags are beautifully designed by the graphic designer who we work very closely with. So he tops that whole experience up by creating all these different messages on the coffee bags, which puts a smile on our faces and I think on the customers' faces as well. So you basically would want to take that experience home. This is the view into the kitchen. So we basically made the kitchen an open kitchen, as small as it is, but we only want to show really what's appealing to the customer. So the food stacked on the side, then the sandwich is freshly made, ready to come over that pass-through window. So to open the kitchen up and basically saying, we're showing you what we're making, we don't hide whatever is happening in the kitchen, and basically opening it up to the customer, and so the customer can interact and doesn't feel the food has been created in the back away from me. So and the way we've done it is we used a lot of the steel internally as well. So we had the steel beams and steel columns, and then we used very raw materials, only a very few materials. Again, the simplicity of the space was really important to us, to create something which only had a few materials, which was timber, concrete, and steel and glass. And this is folded black steel, raw steel, so the really untreated steel. So and then you see the roaster in the back. This is part of the coffee counter, so that's called the pour over, which is part of the coffee making. So the whole area basically is covered by a ceiling, has some lights focusing on the counter and basically telling the story of the coffee making and allowing you, by sitting on the back and the front of the counter, to be really part of that whole making space. The left-hand side is the roaster, the rear roaster, and then the steel beams draw you to the other side. That's the shelves on the back with then the second roaster. So it's really all visible. The operations are very neat and tidy, I have to say. That's the great thing about our client. He doesn't like mess, and he actually really has his warehouse open and it's actually appealing. Like, you don't think you're in a nasty kitchen where you can't eat from. And then we basically created some simple details to for the tables, this is folded steel. These are just on the side, on the back of the counter, so it's 6mm folded steel, which is basically very simply fixed to the brick wall, and then some purposely designed chairs for the space for the client. Just to enhance that experience, this is next to the point of sale, we've got the cake unit, which is the cakes which come out of that tiny kitchen as well, all homemade by the chefs, and put there again in that raw steel cabinet, but ready to display. Very simple backdrop to the beautiful food being created in the space to complement the coffee. And what's always really important to us, again, is that experience and that little smile on your face. So the graphics, this is what the graphic designer put up, and basically that's the entrance to the warehouse, and it's where all the bikes get stored. And so we do insert some graphics or some kind of where you just go, oh, really? That's kind of, if you all want to read it. If you have any answers, we'll be happy to provide full and detailed questions.
And I guess for us, it was about building a narrative to the customer. We're kind of talking to the customer, and it's a playful sort of interaction with them.
Yeah. So if you have any questions about, or any answers about the coffee roasting, and basically those sort of questions about how to make coffee, how to do it. So the graphic designer basically took that to that step and put it in. And it's actually on the coffee. So that's the coffee cup where you get the coffee served, and it's got that on it too. And the graphics do change. So whatever's on the coffee bags doesn't stay on there for years. It actually changes. It completely evolves. So the customer wants to come back and experience something new. So this is a decaf coffee. So just for the, DC. So it's coded, but you're happy to interact with the space.
And I think because the space is so open, the programs are segregated within the space, but they kind of interact with each other. So as a customer, you can see the roasting process and you can see the cupping process. So it's an open operation, and I think there's a deep level of engagement there with the people who are just having the coffee. They can actually see their beans being roasted. Mm-hmm. So you're part of the experience. You're not being talked to as such.
Yeah. And it was interesting because the floor plan, actually, we might just very quickly go back, just on that. Just in the back here, we basically, the client said to start with, let's put an end to the seating area. So this area is actually a little bit higher, the 1100 sort of bench. I'll show you on this one here too. So in the back here, that's a little bit higher. So to start with, that was kind of almost creating a barrier without being a barrier. So we'll still let you interact, we'll still make you sit here. The way it's operating now is that the cafe is so packed and he had to expand, and people are basically sitting around the roaster, totally around the roaster. So you really, while someone's roasting there, it's quite amazing, that experience of really smelling those. And I actually, before we started working for him, I didn't know that coffee beans unroasted are green. So I've learned a bit in the process as well, which has been fantastic. So, yeah. We'll go to the next space, Little Bean Blue.
Yep.
Do you want to start doing it?
Yep. So this space is quite different. It's a retail outlet for coffee. So it was focused solely on preparing and selling coffee. And it only sells small pre-prepared food items. You can see the cake display in the front. And we had to convince our client that he had to sell food with the coffee. He was absolutely determined that it was just coffee. It's only 4 metres wide. It's a little insertion in one of the smaller streets in the Melbourne CBD, and it's planned very, very simply. So this came before the Code Black project, and it was actually developed at a time when Melbourne was going through a third wave coffee revolution. You might know Melbourne, it's well known for its coffee, and this was part of that. So people were going away from the production of espresso coffees and looking at cold filter or cold drip filter coffee and the different ways that coffee can be prepared and consumed. So for this client, he really wanted to educate and impart that knowledge to the customer in an environment that felt quite holistic and embracing. So what we did is we looked at that sort of educational experience from the customer side, that maybe they're in a science laboratory, they're taking part in the experiments, or maybe they're in a lecture hall and all the information is there, and it's part of that input of learning that the barista might be the professor, but you're there taking in the knowledge as well. You're not being talked to, the information's being shared with you. And from that, there's just one long counter line. The espresso machine sits at the front, and then the pour-over bar happens behind that. So you really have to come up and interact with the barista to order your coffee, and then you see it happen in front of you. And then we just have some small seating on the left-hand side. But we sort of played with these elements in the space. We really tried to pare it back so that very simple design elements, but we tried to make them talk to the customer. So the tile on this wall face is an interpretation of a graphic of coffee production through the world. So we sort of put that up on the wall, and then we've got this exposed pipework, which is about that pared back space. It is only decorative, we just have the wiring for the lighting coming through it, but it's part of that simplicity and I guess the tactile nature of the space. What else was there? And I guess for us, we are very interested in creating a narrative in our spaces. We like sharing the story with the customer in a very holistic way. And we feel that this is something that has a deeper connection to our customers. And it's been amazing, the response that you've had to a project like this, which has that connection to something that perhaps is a very normal, possibly retail space, where people know the program and they just accept it and they move on. This is something that's been much more challenging for customers, but so many people say, I go there all the time, or yeah, that's my favourite place for coffee. I go there for breakfast on the weekend. And so people come back to these spaces a lot more than maybe other spaces that we've designed.
And it's interesting because we're not trying to, I mean, in this space, the story is there, but we're trying to create a narrative behind each of our designs and then pare it back and then be really simple about it, so that it's not about our story necessarily. It's to give the customer a story, so you feel you're entering into a space which is not your usual office. Like you're actually going away from your office and coming into a space and get another experience, but pare it back and don't overdo it. That's really sort of our secret as well, I think.
And probably something that's happened in both of these projects is that it hasn't been a very standard sort of design process for us. It's something that's been thrown back to the client. They've come back, and there's been a lot of interchange with the client. They've pushed us, we've pushed them, and from that we get this amazing space and product at the end of it. So that's been challenging, but it's been very rewarding. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great. So we open up for questions. Questions from the audience? So I have a question, just to provoke some of the conversation. So it's interesting that there's a theme of inversion in both of the projects. Can you talk about that? I mean, it's symbolic in the graphic that you presented, right? Don't ask us questions, give us answers. But that's, in a sense, what you're doing is you don't want people to come in and get everything. They want to build it. Can you talk a little bit about that inversion?
I think we approached our design or the creation of spaces from very much the customer perception. What will they experience when they come into the space? What will the first thing we see be, or they see be? And we're trying to build that experience and build that narrative. So we're almost pulling apart the space so that they can impart their experience on it and talk to us, and that's kind of what we're asking for. You talk to us about your experience as well. You want to add to that?
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it just seems like counterintuitive to everything we're taught in architecture school, yes?
Absolutely. And funnily enough, we're both interior design, or interior architect, interior designer, went on did architecture and have come back to interior design, because I find traditional architectural methodology so, in a way, so boring, because it's telling people what to do, and it's not interesting.
It doesn't interact probably enough with the customer. It's a bit like what Carrie said last night. Interacting with put the customer first, and that's what we want to do as well. We don't want to build our own castle, and we don't want to build our own beautiful space, but we take on board and then insert a story into the space and say, this is for you.
Yeah. And
probably, we love being the customer as well. So we come from the customer side, but we love what we do, and so that's probably where, yeah.
And we often say that, you know, we hand over these spaces and they become something else, something unexpected. And so for us, there's a sense of discovery as well, that we didn't expect Code Black to perhaps have the response it's had. We approached it the best way we, you know, in an intelligent way, but it's got its own personality now. It's beyond us. It's out there in the world and it's doing its own thing. So for us, we've kind of let it go. It's like having a baby. They grow up and they get legs and off they go and they can talk back. And so that's what it's about.
It's probably what you said before in your talk as well, like we built the space. We still try and create a story in that space, so it's not just a flat platform. We'll give it a backdrop as well. Like we give a third dimension, but then to see that space coming alive in that next, in that next level, that other platform where the people interact and people come in. And for me, one of the experiences was that the night before Code Black opened, it was still, you know, it was still a building site. People were still cleaning. It looked like a complete mess still. I left Friday at 5 o'clock, and on the weekend they had a coffee conference there. So the next morning I came, there was 300 people occupying the space, and I opened the door, I almost cried. It was amazing because suddenly it was like, it was alive, and it became that platform for interaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Questions? Other questions? Do you have coffee spaces like this here that are exciting? Or is it all Starbucks?
We haven't found any good coffee, so if anyone does, you can let us know. No?
So maybe another question. So interesting that you bring up Plasma, right? I mean, it's absolute genius in the way he deals with interactions in space and brings an embodiment theory into his writing. So the question is that it seems like your information that you're using is the multisensory perception.
Yeah.
So you're not using information the way I talk about information.
And I found your presentation almost quite confronting because it's almost a separation between what we might experience in our body, and I guess we're seeking a body experience, and you're talking about a technological experience perhaps.
So embodiment is then key to this perception.
Yes.
I think they're actually both needed, like all of them are needed, like what you were talking about and the other one as well, but I think we need to touch on our senses because we're humans. Like that's kind of...
So this comes alive a little bit in so the two things intersect a little bit in the second project, right, where the barista becomes a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? Did you guys come up with that, or was it the idea of the cafe? How did that come across?
Well, the client really said, I really want to just sell coffee, and because of that idea of, and the time when Melbourne went through that time of it's called the third wave coffee, to educate people about pour over and other ways of making coffee, not just the coffee machine. We just said, we just need to communicate that to the customer. So who communicates that better than the barista who is making the coffee? So, and then it basically sort of became the coffee lab almost, like, you know, I'm trying to have all the information, like the teacher behind me on the whiteboard or the blackboard still. And we actually got the graphic designer to put that on the boards. There's actually all that history and the knowledge is on the board. So it's not just silly writing, but it actually does
But it's
say
often
something.
Developed, this particular client is incredibly vague in developing a brief. And so he sort of says, I've got this thing I want to do, and it's like a one-liner. And then we have to extract that and then pull it out. And so we have a conversation with him, and it's back and forth all the time. So Code Black was, I think we went through 3 iterations before we landed on a floor plan even. And it was, you know, we were pulling our teeth out by the end of it because we're just like, what does he want? And then we ended up with something, and he's like, yeah. Because we've pushed him enough that he goes, yeah, I can see my vision fitting into what the way the space is developing. So it's often a conversation, and from that, really good briefs start to happen, but it's difficult.
So why it's fascinating to me is because we work with large organizations like Steelcase, Motorola, Boeing, and all of them are interested in what customers are saying. They just don't have the tools to do it, right? They use traditional tools like surveys, and how boring is that, right? But what you're using is space as a catalyst for customer insight. So that's particularly interesting.
I thought in your talk, just sort of cross-referencing, but when you talked about, was it Samsung with the microchips, and you said I could spread them to the wind and find, and I thought, wouldn't that be amazing to sort of blow them into a cafe, and I can say, oh, someone sat in the seat before me, and they are this person, and that's their story, and that's my story, and you sort of get this multi-layered stories. I think that would be a very interesting way to share that data collection, perhaps. It's not to go to a big brother organisation, it's actually just a collective moment in the space. So I think that is an interesting way technology can feed into this perhaps multi-layered sensory experience or a body experience. Yep.
So, we have a question? Just, can we have the mic here? Just one.
I just wanted to ask you, when you did the smaller project first, presumably you spent some time in there after it opened, and I just wonder what sort of insights you took from that project about how people use the space into doing the larger Cafe Black project.
I guess we've done lots of different ones in between, so they weren't just consecutive, but just a way to have a narrative and basically break. I mean, in the first one we didn't have a lot of space to break the spaces up, whereas it still had the coffee counter and then the back of house as well to be combined.
But I think the thing that was surprising in Little Bean Blue was the level of engagement. So I popped in there, you know, I'd been running for a couple of weeks, and there was like one of the barista judges sitting on the pour-over bar who we know, and I was like, oh God, and he was sitting there talking to the barista, and it was like this amazing sort of engagement with the spaces, people having coffee. You could see people had fully embraced the space. And I think from that it built a confidence that this worked. So it was almost the starting point to the bigger project, perhaps.
Yep. That we have people almost sitting at the counter and not just be the counter, the separate, like the barrier between the customer and the service person, to call them, or the barista, but to actually say, I'm allowed to sit here. It's almost in your own kitchen. So I'm preparing this for you, with you. I'm sharing this with you. I'm happy to make you part of this whole experience rather than, create the barriers. And that's the same thing with the open kitchen. Like it's a lot done now in Melbourne. A lot of people do it to actually expose their kitchen, the food making, because people want to be engaged in it, because people want to know, want to see. And sometimes, funnily enough, you come into restaurants. There was one experience. It's quite a lovely restaurant, and I could see into the dishwashing area. Yeah, you know, the food prep, and then a dishwashing area. It's like, put a ball there. You can't expose everything. It's nice to know that my dishes are washed, but when I'm in a fine dining experience, not fine dining, but when I come to enjoy the food, I don't want to see my dishes being washed, and that's sort of where our challenge is to create, maybe not barriers, but to not make back of house too visible. Whereas at Code Black, we still have next to the kitchen window is actually the window where the dirty dishes go. So yes, you put them in there and you know where they go, but then they're kind of, it's a very small space that disappear very quickly into not being seen.
I think the human element's really interesting and really important. Coffee is a bit like craft beer in that it's quite geeky, and there's a sort of wish for people to actually engage with the people involved in it and learn about the different subtleties and levels of things as well.
It's becoming like wine tasting in that, you know, coffee preparation can take so many forms, and you can drink a cold coffee and it tastes like a wine, and so there's it's become quite exclusive and almost a little bit intimidating, and so that's what we've been trying to break down in a way.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for, but I'm sure you're hanging around to answer more questions. Thank you so much, Katherine and